Good evening, good afternoon, good evening, good day, good Monday, everybody. How's everybody doing? Hope you guys are doing all right. Looks like the ping on Discord for the stream didn't work. I might have to do it manually. Let's wait another minute and see what happens, so I don't do a double ping by accident. Well, today we're going to be doing something different. I was going to stream ZZZ today, as normal, as expected of the weekly schedule. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't really feel like streaming a game tonight. I'm a bit, I mean, I'm feeling okay. I'm just not really in the mood for it. So I didn't want to, have a, just force myself to play the game and not enjoy it. And I probably won't stream too long anyways, so I didn't want to have like a super short gaming stream and have to cut the quest short or something like that. So yeah, I just decided to do something different, something that I've been wanting to do for a while anyways, which is make music related streams, since that's my, biggest passion, even more so than gaming. So yeah, that's what we're doing today, and it will be hopefully the first of many streams with this general theme, or at least this format. And we'll see how it goes. We'll make some adaptations, if need be. And yeah, probably won't be a weekly thing, because I still, I'm already playing a lot of games, 4 games that I'm streaming regularly. So I don't want to, take space from those games to talk, too much about music and just yap. But I'll try to do it at least once a month. Let's see how it works, if it works well. Maybe we'll pick that up, and if you guys like it, maybe we can do it more often in the future. But for the time being, I'm gonna try to do it at least once a month. Especially since these are kinds of streams that I need to prepare for. In order to put out the information that I'd like to. But yeah, I'm gonna explain everything, the format, what we're doing, what we're talking about. Obviously, we're ranking albums, we're doing a tier list, but there's more to it than just that. So yeah, looks like the ping didn't go through on Discord, so I'm gonna make a manual one. If there's a double one later, whatever. Alright, but without further ado, let's say a prayer and then we'll get right into it. Good evening, Andres. You said good morning, but I don't think it's morning where you live. I don't think you're in Japan or Australia or something. So yeah. Let's say a prayer and then we'll get into it. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Okay, so let me explain what we're doing today. Today we will be ranking and discussing every studio album by the band Rainbow. also known as Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. I put the full name on the title because, you know, rainbow is a very generic word. So, you know, just for clarification. But the band is more commonly referred to as just Rainbow. The first album is called Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, and that is because Ritchie Blackmore was already famous when he started Rainbow, because he was previously in the band Deep Purple, which you might have heard of. You know, they have authored, you know, albums such as Machine Head, In Rock, Burn, you know, lots of very important albums for rock music, specifically hard rock. And, you know, he's the guy behind Smoke on the Water, Highway Star, Lazy, Burn, Perfect Strangers, you know, all those rock hits that still play on the radio today, and that are the building blocks, like probably some of the first, if not the first, songs that every guitar player learns. And, you know, Ritchie Blackmore is an insanely respected guitarist and musician, but even then, I still feel like I hold him at an even higher regard than most people. I personally think he is the single greatest musician of his generation, and one of the greatest musicians of all time. I genuinely hold that belief, and I have insane respect for this man as a musician. So that's why I chose. That's one of the reasons I chose, you know, his band to start with. I was going to do Impellitteri, which is another band that we're going to talk about in the future, definitely. But I didn't have time to finish listening to other albums again in time. I still have to I still have to re-listen to their two latest albums, and I didn't think it would be fair to talk about them and rank their albums without listening to the last two albums again. I have heard them before, mostly, if not entirely, but I honestly don't recall much of them, so it would be, you know, unfair for me to rank them or judge them or talk about them. So once I do listen to them, they're a band that you can expect to be featured here. It's also a band that I hold in very high regard. Not nearly as high as Rainbow, but it's also a very, very cool band. Good evening, AW. Alright, so here's what we're going to do. Let me switch to the browser tab. So I prepared a tier list here because there wasn't one already, so I made one with every single Rainbow studio album. There's 8 of them. Although a lot of people consider that there are only 3, but we'll get into that later as we progress through. Let me just put them here in chronological order. There we go. They're in chronological order now. That's the order that we're going to be talking about them in. So yeah. First, let's talk about the tiers, right? So S tier is going to be, you know, I'm going to be conservative with the rankings. S tier albums are albums that are game changers. So they are albums that are either, you know, the band's undisputed magnum opus, or albums that contributed so much to the genre or to music as a whole that, you know, I'm just forced to put aside all of my personal bias and, you know, just accept them as for what they are, you know? Like an example would probably be like, you know, Metallica's Master of Puppets. You know, it's an album. It's not my favorite Metallica album. Um, and it's an album that I'm kind of tired of listening to. I think a lot of the songs are way too overplayed, and I think some of the songs have good moments. Some of them are a little bit, you know, they're good songs, but they get over you get over them. I don't think it's a flawless album like some people say. It's an amazing album, but it is, you know, not a flawless album like some people say. But it's an album that just has, you know, so much impact on the genre. It's so genre defining, and it's such a, you know, monumental heavy metal record that it would be, you know, a sin to put it, you know, beneath S tier. So that's just an example. The rest of the tiers are going to have a lot more of my personal input. So A tier is just, you know, a very, very, very good album that has, you know, all killer, no filler, great songs, cover to cover. Maybe it has, you know, one or two weak points, like every album usually does. You know, not every album is full of 10 out of 10 songs. B tier is average, and I'm going to do average in relation to the band's material. So it's not going to be average, you know, as a whole. So, you know, it's just average. Like in relation to the band's own material, I guess. So what would be maybe a good starting point if you don't, you know, I don't always sometimes, you know, it's best to start from the band's absolute best work. But I feel like if you do that, sometimes you get let down by some of the other material. So it's an album that you wouldn't hold to an extremely high regard, but that is far from being a disappointment. Um, and then, you know, C and D tier are albums that are, you know, below average. So these are albums that are going to be disappointing in one way or another. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad albums, and we're going to talk about that when we get to them. But they just don't hold a candle to the band's absolute best work. Especially D tier. You know, D tier is probably going to be reserved for albums that you shouldn't even bother listening to unless you're a huge fan of the band, or albums that were probably, you know, better off not being released, or at least, you know, reworked heavily before being released. So albums that just missed the mark. Even albums in D tier are going to have, you know, songs that are good, which brings us to the next point. An album is not just the sum of its parts. An album is not just a, you know, addition of the songs that it's made up of. So an album may have a really, really, really good song, but, you know, the rest of the album may not be good. Or the theme of the album may not be good, or the album may just be inconsistent, which means that, you know, it just doesn't, you know, go together like a concise work of art. I want you to think of a music album like a book, not like, you know, a collection of art pieces that you might see from like a painter, where they, you know, have different themes and different techniques and different, you know, styles. An album is a lot like a book, even if it's not a concept album. You know, obviously concept albums are a thing, and they take that concept to the extreme. They do their best in a deliberate effort to tell a story with a start and a middle and a finish, an ending. But even albums that aren't concept albums should still be thought as books, or at least similarly to books. Because if they're not, then they are no different from a compilation or even a playlist of songs. And that's not what an album ought to be. An album ought to be an exploration of themes and styles and sounds with a concise aesthetic. That doesn't mean every song has to be about the same thing. That doesn't mean every song has to sound the same. That doesn't mean every song has to be in the same genre or in the same style. But there has to be a line that threads through each and every song in the album and connects them together, creating a concise story. I feel like most albums out there do not fit this definition of album. Well, that's because most albums out there are bad. You know, there are a lot of albums that really are just a compilation of songs. They're no different from a playlist. You know, whatever songs the artist had that they deemed were not bad enough to be trashed, they just recorded and put it in an album because their label needed, you know, at least 8 songs or something like that. The vast majority of albums out there are bad albums. It's just true. Just like the vast majority of books out there are bad books. You know, not every book is The Lord of the Rings. You know, even books that I don't like, not every book is Harry Potter. You know, if you compare, you know, I don't like Harry Potter. I don't think it's that great of a book. But if you compare it to, you know, every other book that was ever published, it's probably above it's probably above average. You know, it's hard to deny that. The vast majority of art is always terrible. The reason we don't think about it that way is because the only art that is remembered for, you know, a sufficient amount of time is usually good. Or even if it's not exactly great, it's remarkable, sufficiently remarkable in at least one way. So just because not every album does storytelling right, doesn't mean that an album should not be seen as a concise, you know, unitary piece of art. Thinking of albums as a collection of songs, as a playlist, is what ended the LP era, together with, you know, radio play and labels and all that. But yeah, let's get into it. Without further ado, that's enough yapping. That's, you know, 15 minutes of yapping. So let's get into it. So, first of all, what is Rainbow? Just a short introduction. I got the Wikipedia page here. I got the discography page here as well. We need some context. Okay, maybe some of you are familiar with the band. Maybe some of you aren't. That's why we're going to give very, very brief context. I'm not going to read the entire Wikipedia page. Rainbow is a British-American rock band formed in London in 1975 by guitarist Ritchie Blackmore. So like I discussed, Richie was previously in Deep Purple. He left Deep Purple for the first time and almost immediately formed Rainbow with Ronnie James Dio, who was previously in the band Elf, and then he also recruited other band members, some of which we're going to talk about, some of which not really. So Deep Purple was a combination, stylistically, was a combination of Ritchie Blackmore together with Ian Gillan and John Lord for the most part. Like, those three were the creative heads of the band for the most part. Obviously, the other bands also contributed, but, you know, those three were the big ones, at least for the early Deep Purple. So, the Mark II Deep Purple, which is the classic one. So Rainbow isn't Deep Purple. This is the first thing that we need to establish. Rainbow is not Deep Purple 2 because it lacks the contributions of John Lord and Ian Gillan, and also Ian Pace and, the bassist. I forgot the name of the bassist. That looks bad on me now because I'm a guitar player. Forgetting the name of the bassist. Classic. But yeah, it's not Deep Purple 2. That's an important thing to establish. It has its own style that leans way more heavily into Ritchie's influences than, Deep Purple did. And we're going to talk about what that entails as we go through the albums. So, yeah. Let's talk about the first album, though. The first album is Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. It was released in 1975. And as you can see from the peak chart positions here, it didn't do crazy well. It got a silver certification in the UK, peaked at 11. So it wasn't even a top 10 hit. And then it barely, hit the charts in other countries. Some of them didn't even hit the charts. Some of them, hit very low positions. So this wasn't a very commercially successful album, at least not compared to, Deep Purple's. If we go to Deep Purple here, and we go to Deep Purple's discography, we can compare. You can see that the last album before Blackmore left, which was Come Taste the Band, I believe. Oh no, this one had Tommy Baldwin. Never mind. It was Stormbringer. You can see that the albums here, they're all certified gold in multiple countries. Burn was top 10 in every chart. It was top 1 in several countries. So Deep Purple was a very successful band. And when Richie debuted with Rainbow, it was, successful. Getting a silver and peaking at 11 for your debut album is far from being bad, but it was obviously a lot more niche than Deep Purple was. It never peaked as high as Deep Purple did. That's the truth. That doesn't mean it's worse than Deep Purple, because, commercial success isn't everything. But it's important to know that it wasn't as big a deal as Deep Purple was, culturally or commercially. So, the debut album is a very standard hard rock album. It has 9 songs, one of which is a cover. So 8 original songs. And 4 on the A side, 4 on the B side, and then the cover at the end of the B side as well. And it's an extremely standard hard rock album. You have Man on the Silver Mountain, which is, the album doesn't have a title track, but it is as close to a title track as it gets. It's the most identifiable song on the record, and it remained a staple of the Rainbow set list and the Rainbow discography for forever. Still is today. Actually, there's 2 covers. Black Sheep of the Family is a cover too. My bad. So 7 original songs and 2 covers. I stand corrected. And Man on the Silver Mountain is a rock and roll hard rock banger in the same way that Smoke on the Water was. Obviously, it doesn't have the same amount of impact. It's not as famous of a song. But it has all the same qualities that a song like Smoke on the Water does. It has a very catchy pentatonic riff with inverted power chords. It has lyrics that are telling a story. It has a cool solo. And it sits at a length of 4 minutes and 42 seconds, which might seem long, but it's, you know, pretty standard for this type of music. This song is the most important song from this album, which is why I'm talking so much about it. But it's not a very, you know, if this is the only Rainbow song that you ever listen to, you're not going to get a full picture of Rainbow. The riff from Man on Silver Mountain is like the go-to riff for all those who want to learn to play the guitar. Yeah, honestly, the go-to riff is the Smoke on the Water riff. But if you like Deep Purple and you like Ritchie Blackmore, Man on the Silver Mountain is probably like one of the first that you're going to listen to learn after Smoke on the Water. Definitely, it's a very easy riff. It's a very easy song to play. Well, the entire song isn't easy to play, but the main riff is very easy to play. It's very catchy. And it's very iconic as well. Not as iconic as Smoke on the Water again, but very iconic. But yeah, like I was saying, if this is the only Rainbow song that you ever listen to, you're not going to get a full picture of Rainbow, because it is a very, very, very standard hard rock song. Which isn't to say it's bad, far from it. It's an excellent song. But as we are going to see, Rainbow is going to develop into a much grander thing than this album lets on. Another highlight of the album is Catch the Rainbow. Catch the Rainbow is a ballad. It's a hard rock ballad. And it's one of the most beautiful songs ever written. Okay? I'm going to tell you that straight up. Catch the Rainbow is one of the most beautiful songs ever written. Ever pressed onto a vinyl. If you haven't heard this song, if you haven't heard this album, it's honestly worth listening just for this song. It has, you know, amazing melodies, amazing harmony, outstanding singing, some of Dio's best ever singing. So yeah, I genuinely think it's one of the most beautiful songs ever written. And you can see that it's quite long, 6 minutes 27. But it's worth it. It's worth every second. And when they performed this song live, they would make it much longer, because they would have a long instrumental interlude with Richie soloing, and he would do it differently every time. We're not going to talk too much about Rainbow's live performances, because it would take too long, but they are one of those bands that are almost always better live. They just have these fantastic performances live. And Catch the Rainbow is one of the songs that allowed for the most experimenting, and that experimenting live sometimes enhanced the already brilliant songwriting of this song. Now, on the B-side, I would probably say that the highlights are Temple of the King, which is also somewhat of a ballad. It's a very calm song. This is probably also maybe the third most iconic song from this album. And, you know, the other songs are okay. They're pretty good to okay. If you don't like Rock and Roll is a very, very standard hard rock song as well. It's super short. It's one of those songs that you almost wish was longer. But it's a fun song. Great driving song. 16th Century Greensleeves is also a very fun song. The cover, the Quartermass cover, Black Sheep of the Family, probably one of the low points in the album. It's not a bad song, but I don't think it holds a candle to Man on Silver Mountain or Catch the Rainbow. And because it's sandwiched between them, you know, it kind of feels like it's a bit weaker than it actually is. And at the end of the album closes with Still I'm Sad, which is an instrumental cover of the Yardbirds, which was a band formed by Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page. So it was a super trio. It's a good cover. It's a great song. It's a song that was never officially recorded, as far as I'm aware. So this is, you know, an official recording of a song that was never officially recorded. It was something that the Yardbirds performed live a few times, but I don't think it was ever on a record. So yeah, where does that put the debut album? I think it puts the debut album at a B. You know, which is very fitting. You know, I said that the B ranking doesn't mean that it's bad. Just means that it's the baseline quality of the band. So I think that the debut album did a good job at setting that baseline. Because from here you can expect much greater things. But even if they're not greater, the baseline is already so high that, you know, every other album is already worth listening to just because of how good the baseline is. And, you know, that's the point that I'm going to make. Even though we're going to have albums that are not ranked highly, I think every Rainbow album is good, and I think every Rainbow album is worth listening to. I don't think there's a single bad Rainbow album. Far from it. But, you know, we're going to put the debut on the B as the baseline for the rest of the tier list. It's a good album, but it doesn't have a fully developed Rainbow identity yet, and the band hasn't delivered the full potential yet. So now let's move on to the next one. The next one is Rising, Rainbow Rising, released in May of 1976. And here's where things take a leap, okay? Because here's what happened. With this album, Gary Driscoll, which was on drums for the original album, left, and they hired a guy that goes by Cozy Powell. If you're not a drummer or a Rainbow fan, you may not have heard this name. But Cozy Powell is one of the greatest rock drummers of all time. You know, you can just look at his resume if you click here. Played with Jeff Beck, played with Rainbow, Michael Schenker, Gary Moore, Graham Bonnet, Brian May, Whitesnake, Emerson, Lake and Power, and Black Sabbath. He also played with Yngwie. You know, this guy has an impeccable resume. Rest in peace. He died in a car crash. God bless his soul. But yeah, why does the drummer make a difference? Is what you're probably asking if you haven't heard this album, or if you're not familiar with Rainbow. Well, we went from a very standard hard rock album in the debut Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow to what is a monumental building block in not only heavy metal, but what would become one of the most long-standing genres of heavy metal, which is power metal. And if you're, you know, a bit flabbergasted by that, you should be, because I did say that there was quite a leap from the first to the second album. Now, this album isn't perfect, and it's a bit of an odd album. You can see that it only has 6 tracks in the original release. And you might notice that side 1 has 4 tracks that are mostly standard length. 5 minutes, 2:58, so 3 minutes, 4 minutes, almost 4. This one's almost 6, but it has a keyboard intro, so it's, you know, a little bit inflated. And then the side 2 has 2 albums that are both over 8 minutes long. So this album, this side B alone, is 16 minutes, almost 17 minutes, with 2 tracks. And this side adds to what, 5, 8, 12, 15. So yeah, they're both about the same length, but side B has half the songs. How come, you may be asking? What's so special about these 2 tracks on side B that they deserve to be as lengthy as the entire first half of the album? Well, we're going to talk about that, because the reason this album is as great as it is because of side 2. But first let's talk about side A. Side 1. The album opens with Terror Woman, which has a keyboard intro, which is why the song length is a little bit inflated. And it's a very standard hard rock song, something that you could hear on the debut album. Then it has Run with the Wolf, that is also a pretty standard hard rock song. And the same can be said for Starstruck and Do You Close Your Eyes. Now, the thing about all of these songs, especially Starstruck and Do You Close Your Eyes, is that if compared to the songs from the original debut album, they're a bit more lively. They have a bit more energy to them. While the debut album had a lot of calm songs, it had some energetic songs, but it had a few more calm songs that, while they were still bangers, they were very soothing. They were very, elegant, relaxing in a way. This one is a lot more energetic right off the bat, and pretty much through and through. And of course, the main contributing factor to that is Ritchie Blackmore, and how his guitar playing started to develop as he embarked on this, new band. A lot of it also has to do with Cozy, because Cozy is a very intense drummer. So he adds an energy to songs that other drummers simply don't. So if you take away the drums from the song, and you just listen to them that way, they might not even seem that energetic to you. They might seem like standard hard rock songs. But the way Cozy composes the drums and the percussions for these songs make them have, a life of their own that very few drummers are capable of, matching. So these 4 standard hard rock songs that make up the A side of this album are all great in their own right, but they would be unremarkable were it not for some of this extra energy that Cozy brought, especially in contrast to the first album. But even then, they are not, bangers, absolute slammers. They're fine hard rock songs. Any of them could have been in the debut album, and you will enjoy all of them when you listen to this album. But the real reason this album is a conversation piece is side 2. So let's talk about side 2. What does side 2 of this album contain? Well, I mentioned that it contains 2 songs that are over 8 minutes long. But in reality, I want to sell you that side B of this album, is a singular song that is 17 minutes in length, almost 17 minutes in length. Because Stargazer and A Light in the Black are very much connected lyrically. They are, A Light in the Black is a literal sequel to Stargazer, a direct continuation from the story. And they are also very much related sonically. Stargazer has a very constant pace, a very constant vibe to it. And when the song ends and A Light in the Black starts, you notice that same aesthetic, that same vibe to it, but the pace, is kicked into the next gear, and the song just goes into a frenzy almost. So it takes what was already a perfect song, because Stargazer is probably one of the examples of what a perfect song sounds like, and it takes that and it keeps running with it even faster than before, with even more intensity. So Stargazer is the most important song that Rainbow ever wrote. It's not my favorite Rainbow song. I do have to say that I actually prefer A Light in the Black to Stargazer, but it is the single most important song that Rainbow ever wrote. And it is sonically, aesthetically, thematically, lyrically, stylistically, a gigantic building block to what would eventually become power metal. And A Light in the Black is also an immense contribution to that. Stargazer is has a main riff that is very, traditionally rock and roll. Uses the blues scale. It's in E minor. It modulates a little bit, of course, but it's in E minor. Uses the blues scale, with the blue notes. Some pentatonic sounds. And it has a solo that is, in a very exotic scale. It uses a lot of intervals from harmonic minor and from Phrygian. So these are sounds that would become mainstay, like staples of metal. Every metal song has a Phrygian chord or a harmonic minor leading tone. But in the 70s, in the mid-70s, these things were still not common in mainstream rock, at least not nearly as much as they would eventually become. So that style of soloing that Ritchie utilizes in Stargazer is not only somewhat unique to him, and a glimpse into a new style of playing that he was developing that was completely unheard of, and that would contribute to some of the greatest guitar playing in the history of mankind. It's something that's different. It's something that made Rainbow into more than just a hard rock band. And then more specifically, leading into A Light in the Black, A Light in the Black has two elements that are very, very cool and very, very important to heavy metal and especially power metal. The first of them, we're going to go back to Cozy Powell. A Light in the Black has extensive use of double bass drums. So it has that continuous double kick going through the song, not the entire song, but some parts, that really drives that, war energy that you get from metal, and especially later on from power metal. And, in 1975, or 1976 rather, this still wasn't exactly common. It wouldn't become common until the early 80s, in fact. With bands like Accept and stuff. So it's still, quite a bit ahead of its time. And another thing that it also features, that was something that was already used in music, obviously, but not in this way, is arpeggios on the guitar. So chords that are broken into singular notes and played as a melody. And this song, because it's a very fast song, does that with quite a lot of pace, and it has a beautiful melodic interlude that utilizes these arpeggios in combination with the double kicks. And it plays twice during the song, after the guitar solo, and then after the keyboard solo again. So these two songs are simply monumental staples of rock and heavy metal music. And without them, we probably wouldn't have gotten power metal as soon as we did. And maybe not even would have gotten it in the fashion that we did at all. Maybe it would be something else entirely. Obviously, there's no way of speculating that, accurately. But these songs are truly, truly, truly staples of the genre and masterpieces in their own right. And especially together with one another. Because Stargazer is such a staple, you can see that it even has its own Wikipedia page. Sometimes it overshadows A Light in the Black. But I need to emphasize that if you're listening to this album, and especially to Stargazer, you need to listen to these two songs as a single piece of music. Almost like a piece of music with two distinct movements that complement each other. So because of side B alone, there's no other placement for Rising than S tier. You know, going from side A, it would probably be an A. Maybe even a B, honestly. Probably an A, but it wouldn't be nearly as remarkable. It wouldn't be a fraction as remarkable as it is because of side B. So if there's one thing you take away from this entire stream, I want it to be that you need to listen to these two songs, one after the other, together as a singular piece of music. If that's the only thing that you take away from today, I've done my job. Okay? Let's move on. Now, the third album is Long Live Rock and Roll, and it's the last album to feature Ronnie James Dio on vocals. Okay, I didn't even talk about Dio when I was talking about Rising, okay, but his performance on Rising is also exceptional. That should kind of go without saying, because his performance is always exceptional. But I don't want to rant about Rising for 50 minutes and not talk about the other albums. So just take it for granted that Dio's vocals are exceptional, okay? Would you say that A Light in the Black was more influential in the widespread adoption of double bass drums in metal than Motorhead? That's a good question. There's a few things that we need to look at when we to answer that question. I cannot spell. The first thing we need to look at is timeline. Okay? So Rainbow Rising was released in May 1976. Motorhead's first studio album was released in 1977. August 1977. So more than a year later. And, you know, obviously Motorhead would peak with Ace of Spades, which was released in 1980. But they already had their sound, you know, with Overkill. By Overkill, they already had their own distinct sound, and it's a sound that's very, you know, unique, I guess. It's very different from Rainbow. It's very unique in their own way, but to answer your question, and I'm going to try to be brief so I don't talk about this for another 10 minutes. I would say that it's hard for me to say whether it was more or less influential than Motorhead. But I think there's an argument to be made that, you know, it influenced Motorhead in a way. And I think that stylistically, the way that the double bass is used as a part of the whole composition is very different in Rainbow songs to Motorhead songs. It's a little bit hard to explain that in words, but I would say that they both contributed significantly, but they have sufficiently different aesthetics that they would branch out into different styles. Their contributions, their influence would be more present in different styles of music, you know? If you listen to power metal, A Light in the Black is definitely more influential, because every single power metal guitarist that is honest will tell you that they love Rainbow. And meanwhile, Motorhead would become a lot more influential in speed metal, which is a genre that they basically contributed to the very existence of. And the other genres that, you know, came to be because of speed metal. So thrash metal, death metal, all of that. So if you ask a thrash metal guitar player whether they prefer Rainbow or Motorhead, they're probably going to say Motorhead. If you ask a power metal musician, they're probably going to say Rainbow. So I think that they're both very influential in their own ways, and their aesthetics are different enough that they contributed to different styles of music. But because, you know, Rainbow Rising came out a year earlier than Motorhead's debut, I would say that it probably has a bit of an edge if we're talking, you know, if we have to quantify influence, which is something that's very hard to do. But if we had to quantify it, I would probably say that it has a little bit more of an influence, because Motorhead would also be influenced by it. So it has to take some credit for the influence that Motorhead had as well, you know? But yeah, moving on to Long Live Rock and Roll, and I'm gonna need to go get a glass of water after this because I'm yapping too much. Long Live Rock and Roll was the last album to feature Ronnie James Dio, and it's a little bit of a more of a standard album. You can see that it has 4 tracks on the A side, 4 tracks on the B side, no covers, no crazy 16-minute pieces. Or the closest it gets to is Rainbow Eyes at 7 minutes 31 seconds. But this is a song that is very different from Stargazer or A Light in the Black. Has absolutely nothing to do with them. We're gonna talk about it. Let's talk about the highlights of this album. So the best things about Long Live Rock and Roll, and the reason it is regarded as probably the second best Rainbow album after Rising, are Long Live Rock and Roll, Gates of Babylon, and Kill the King. These 3 songs. Now let me tell you what makes these 3 songs special. They both excel at something that either Stargazer or A Light in the Black, or both of them, pioneered for Rainbow. So Long Live Rock and Roll and Kill the King are both fast-paced songs, especially Kill the King, that definitely have more of a foot in metal than they do in rock, even though, you know, Long Live Rock and Roll is called Long Live Rock and Roll. But, you know, heavy metal is rock and roll, you know, subgenres and whatnot. So these are both very fast-paced songs, especially Kill the King, which you can see has a writing credits also attributed to Cozy Powell, who we've talked about extensively already. And Gates of Babylon also utilizes a lot of the exotic scales, like Phrygians and harmonic minor tones, that kind of contributed to the whole aesthetic and sonic aesthetic of Stargazer. So these 3 songs take what Stargazer and A Light in the Black did exceptionally well in the previous album, and they do it, you know, pretty much just as well. The only reason they are not as regarded as those 2 songs is because they're a little bit shorter, so they are, you know, not as epic, and they came out after, so, you know, they are adding to a style that has already been established by now. But these 3 songs are the absolute highlights of the album, and they make the entire album worth listening to. The rest are more standard hard rock songs that are all, you know, good on their own right, but they don't exactly they don't exactly steal the spotlight. These 3 songs, you know, if you need to, if you're short on time, right, and you're only writing down the best of the best to listen to, make it these 3. Make it Long Live Rock and Roll, Gates of Babylon, and Kill the King. These are the essentials from this album. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about Rainbow Eyes, because if we go back to the first album, even though I gave it a B, you might recall that I said that a little song by the name of Catch the Rainbow was one of the most beautiful songs ever written. That's what I said. You can rewind the stream if you doubt it, or if you missed it. Now, Rainbow Eyes is even calmer, even more of a ballad than Catch the Rainbow was. But I will say that it is almost nearly just as beautiful and magnificent to listen to. I wouldn't say it's a sequel to Catch the Rainbow, even though they both have rainbow in the name. Um, Maybe you could say that. I'm not sure. But it's also another gorgeous masterpiece of a song with majestic melodies and great harmony. So, you know, while it's not a slammer that puts the album at the top of the charts and makes everybody want to headbang and mosh, and while it wasn't, you know, an insane contribution to the genre or anything like that, it's a song that, you know, it's one of those songs that are a little bit slept on. It's a masterpiece in its own right. It's a very beautiful song with great melodies and great harmony. And if you're listening to the album, you will be very satisfied by the way it ends, because it ends with Rainbow Eyes. You know, I have memories of Rainbow. You know, it's a band that's been in my life for a while. And one of the songs that I have the strongest memories with is Rainbow Eyes. It's a song that I specifically remember one day where I was very sad, and I had cried for probably an hour, and I just put this song on repeat, and I just laid on my bed crying, listening to it over and over again, probably for like an hour or so. So you do the math, probably listened to it like 9 times or something in a row. And, you know, I don't even know the lyrics to this song, dude. I know some of them, of course, because I've listened to it so much. But sometimes a song just has harmony and melody that speaks to you more deeply than any lyric can. And these types of things, these types of songs, you know, with melodies that speak to you so deeply, are more of a reason why I consider Ritchie Blackmore to be one of the greatest musicians of all time than, you know, the bangers like Kill the King and A Light in the Black. Because while those songs are bangers and they're genre defining and they're pushing the envelope, it takes a deeper level of artistry to write something pure and intimately touching with just melody and harmony that very, very few musicians are capable of. I'm not capable of it. Far from it. So if you're just in it for the slammers, you're probably gonna skip this one, or you're gonna doze off listening to it. But I do think you should give this song some attention. It's a very beautiful song, and it's an amazing closer to the album. So we're gonna put Long Live Rock and Roll in S tier as well, okay? Now it's only not higher than Rising because it came out later. These two albums are albums that, like, they go hand in hand. And if Long Live Rock and Roll came before Rising, and it would be at the top of S tier, it's just second place because it just came later. So it's not as impactful in terms of influence. The envelope had already begun being pushed. Long Live Rock and Roll just shoved it further, you know? But it does have, it's a great album, and I feel like the some of the other songs that aren't the highlights are a little bit more remarkable even than some of the ones on Rising, especially Rainbow Eyes at the end. So that's why it's also going to go on S tier. I was contemplating putting it in high A just to highlight Rising more, but it's going to be, it deserves the S tier as well. Alright, so now we're going to move on to a new era of Rainbow, because like I said, Long Live Rock and Roll was the last album to feature Ronnie James Dio. And while he is just the vocalist, you know, I'm doing the air quotations, just the vocalist, he did contribute a lot to the writing, especially to the lyrics and the themes that were explored in Rainbow's songs. and it was never quite the same after he left. And we're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about what's worse, and we're going to talk about what's better. But I should just preface it by saying that if you start to get into Rainbow, you will notice that some people claim that these three are the only real Rainbow albums, or the only good Rainbow albums. A lot of people completely disregard the back half of the catalog, so these 5 albums that we have yet to talk about. So, yeah. I think that's a mistake. I think it's a grave, grave mistake to disregard these 5 albums, but unfortunately a lot of people do. So yeah, let's talk about Down to Earth. So what happened after Dio left? Well, Rainbow hired a singer by the name of Graham Bonnet. Now, Graham Bonnet is about as opposite a singer to Ronnie James Dio as one could probably find. And all I need to do to paint that picture is look up a picture of both of them. This is Ronnie James Dio. Okay. And this is Graham Bonnet. Now, what does these 2 images tell you? Here, can I open the image? What do these 2 images tell you? Well, they obviously tell you that these 2 people are very different people. Ronnie has the classic metalhead, long hair, angry face, even though he was a nice guy. Black clothes, the posture with the gestures, he basically popularized the like devil horns, hand sign, hand gesture, whatever. And then there's this guy who kind of looks like somebody your mom might listen to. He looks like a realtor, like a salesman, like a lawyer or something. Or like one of those very, fancy pop singers with an acoustic guitar and, the hair gel. Those kinds of people. And the difference in their appearance says a lot as well about their differences as musicians. Because Graham Bonnet is just that. Graham Bonnet is, technically speaking, an outstanding singer. He has nicknamed the Iron Lung, or the Great Iron Lung, because he has an exceptional vocal range, and even more so, exceptional volume to his singing, right? When he auditioned for Rainbow, he sung together with the band without a microphone, and he could be heard over Richie's, Marshall stack and Cozy Powell's thundering drums without a microphone. He is simply built different. Okay? So technically speaking, as a vocalist, he is impeccable, especially at this time. And he had an insanely powerful voice. Does Dio look like a stereotypical metalhead, or does the stereotypical metalhead look like Dio? That's a good question. Probably the latter. He was definitely a big contributor to that aesthetic, especially in the 80s when he started his solo career. So yeah. Now, what's different about Graham Bonnet, right? If he's such a great singer, well, Dio is an exceptional singer. He's regarded by many people as the greatest rock singer, or the greatest metal singer of all time. So, if Graham Bonnet is just as good technically, what makes him different? Well, Graham Bonnet wasn't a rock singer. That's the thing. If we go over to his page here, where is he? Here, Graham Bonnet. And we go to his career before Rainbow, we're going to find that he wasn't really a rock singer. He did, you know, basically like kind of, you know, AOR or traditional pop songs. You know, you can see here that he has a single, Warm Ride, it's all over now. So it's folk rock, disco. You can see that, you know, this was written by the Bee Gees, leftover from Saturday Night Fever. He did advert jingles. So he wasn't really a rock singer, let alone a hard rock singer. He was doing that kind of style that was called AOR, which is adult-oriented rock, which is basically a way of saying pop rock for moms. And folk rock, which is, you know, more mellow and stuff. Acoustic guitar and voice, all that kind of stuff. And stylistically, he is very, very different from Dio. And this is why people hate, well, this is why diehard Dio fans hate Rainbow without Dio. Because his departure from the band and Bonnet coming in as his replacement gave birth to a new era of Rainbow that was way less swords and sorcery, way less high fantasy, and a lot more AOR, a lot more adult-oriented rock, talking about, you know, real-world issues, talking about partying, talking about, you know, urban life, talking about relationships, talking about love, those kinds of themes that are more common in glam and AOR and more mainstream forms of rock music. So because his joining the band caused that shift from Rainbow's unique thematic themes. Oh wow, thematic themes. I really just said that. From Rainbow's unique thematic choices to more traditional, and I guess you could say overused thematic choices and lyrical themes. A lot of people resent that. They resent Rainbow for changing in that way. They say that it's, you know, selling out, as the kids would say it, even back then. And yeah, if we go back here to the discography, you can see that Down to Earth charted higher than both Long Live Rock and Roll and Rainbow Rising. And it's also certified gold, which is higher than silver, which was a certification for Long Live Rock and Roll. So you can see that you can see why this would upset hardcore fans, especially hardcore Dio fans. But you can also see why the band would move towards this, you know, because after all, it's a job, and bands were extremely reliant on record labels at that time. So if your record label is pressuring you to do a certain kind of music, it's oftentimes very difficult for you to deny that, you know, lest you be left without a record deal, and then you don't have money to fund your own record, and then you don't have money to fund your own tour, and then you're basically out of a job because you can't pay your musicians, and your musicians are going to leave for other bands that are going to sell out. So I'm not going to deny that Down to Earth is when Rainbow sold out. But what I'm going to say is that If every band has to sell out at some point, Rainbow were one of the best to do it. Because they were able to sell out and still remain more musically interesting than just about every other rock band in 1979. Okay? Which is when this album came out. August 1979. So let's go through some of the songs here. All Night Long is one of the highlights singles from the album. It's a banger, straight up hard rock song. Very radio friendly, has a very catchy chorus. And the same can be said for Since You've Been Gone, which is probably the biggest song in this album. It was not written by the band, it was written by Russ Ballard, which is a great songwriter and from England. So these two are the driving, wheels of this album that carried this album commercially. They both have great hooks, very catchy choruses, very catchy riffs, a very standard structure, a very, commercial length, very radio-friendly length. So these two songs are probably the biggest contributors to people saying that Rainbow sold out, because these are songs that could have been done by just about every other rock band. Even though any other rock band probably wouldn't have done them as well as Rainbow did. But they're very standard hard rock songs. They're fun to listen to while you're driving, but they're not going to change your life, okay? These are not songs that are going to change your life. These are not songs that are going to change the genre, like some of the others on the previous two albums did. But we're not talking about singles here. We're talking about the album. So let's look at what else is on this album. Eyes of the World, which is the second song, is a song that may have been left over from previous albums. I don't know this for sure. I'm not stating this. But it's a song that still has a lot of the old Rainbow identity, with very interesting and peculiar melodies and some kind of like some kind of interjections and little fills that are not very, commonplace in rock. So it's a very, very interesting song, and I think Bonnet does a good job at delivering the lyrics to it. No Time to Lose and Making Love are also kind of standard rock songs, not as catchy as Since You've Been Gone or Not All Night Long, but also catchy and also good rock songs. Something that, every Rainbow album has these standard hard rock songs. They sometimes have the more crazy, more epic, more adventurous, more out there songs, but they always have at least, one or two, I guess you could say filler hard rock songs, which, if these are your filler tracks, that means your album is good. So even though this is, a controversial album, even the least remarkable songs are still songs that you can bump in your car, and that they're going to get you pumped, and that you're going to enjoy more than your average Led Zeppelin song. I can say that with a lot of certainty. Now, Love's No Friend of Mine, Love's No Friend is a more of a ballady song as well, like a romantic ballad. Not in the same way that Catch the Rainbow and Rainbow Eyes were, but in the way that like Mistreated was for Deep Purple, if you're familiar with that song. So it's, it's a powerful song as well, a song that was often played live, a song that people can sing along, a song that's a little slower, so it's a nice break from some of the, more pumped up tracks. Danger Zone is a little bit faster paced, which is cool, but also more of a standard hard rock song. And now, in my opinion, Lost in Hollywood, which is the closing track of this album, is the highlight of the album, to me. And if you've been paying attention to the screen here, you might notice that it also is credited to Cozy Powell. So you're probably starting to notice a pattern here. You're probably starting to pick up on a pattern. Song is credited to Cozy Powell. It's a banger, right? And it shouldn't surprise you by now if I tell you that this is the fastest song in the album. It's the most intense song in the album, with the fastest riffs, with the fastest drumming, with the craziest drum fills, with the craziest solo, with an epic, keyboard parts and all that. Now, it's not quite Stargazer, it's not quite A Light in the Black, it's not even, Kill the King. It's still very much a hard rock song, but it's a damn great one at that, man. It's just such a banger of song. So, if you want to get a taste of what the new Rainbow looks like, you're probably going to want to listen to All Night Long and Since You've Been Gone. But if you want a slammer from this album, and you want to see Graham Bonnet at his peak delivery, Blackmore at his blistering solos, and Cozy Powell at his craziest drumming, this is probably the song for you. And it's definitely the highlight of the album, to me. They even played this live later on with Alcatraz. When Graham Bonnet formed Alcatraz with Yngwie, they did this song live, and it's such a banger. Yngwie playing this is a blast. So the original is fantastic. Great song. So my personal recommendation, not the most exemplary song from this album, but definitely the one that sticks out the most to me. But yeah, it's not enough to carry the album. So we're going to put this album in C tier. Now, like I said, there is no bad Rainbow album. I think all Rainbow albums are worth listening to. And it's honestly quite sad for me to have to put this album in C tier, because it's the only album with Graham Bonnet on it. The only Rainbow album with Graham Bonnet. And it's an album that I enjoy listening to. And especially Lost in Hollywood. It's a song that I really like. Probably in my top 10 Rainbow songs of all time. But I think that these, there's not enough high points to match the previous albums. And the rest of the album is a bit too standard. It just doesn't stand out enough. Now, I should give it some points for being commercially successful, but we're going to get more of that going forward. So I think that, just like Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow was a debut to the first era of Rainbow, Down to Earth is a debut to the second era of Rainbow. So while it definitely has its perks, it has its qualities, it has its high points, is not as iconic a debut, and it also doesn't peak as high. So we're going to have some higher peaks going forward now. And now we're going to get into the Joel Turner era of Rainbow, and we're going to see albums that peak way higher than Down to Earth did. Right, so before we move on to the Joel Turner era, which is Difficult to Cure, Straight Between the Eyes, and Bent Out of Shape, I need to go get a glass of water, because I've been talking too much. So give me just, 1 minute, and I'll be right back. Alright, I'm back. Told you that was gonna be quick. I just needed some water to, you know, stay hydrated and go easy on my throat a little bit, because I've been yapping too much. I'm not used to talking this much anymore. Back when I used to give English classes, I was used to talking a lot, and sometimes my throat still got a bit strained. But now that I'm, just chilling, I don't talk this much often. And even when I'm playing games, oftentimes I'm just sitting there playing the game and not yapping all the time. So this is a little bit straining for my voice. But it's okay, it's okay. We'll get through it. We're gonna have a bit of a problem when we get into bands that have like 20 albums, maybe. But, everything at its time. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Hope you guys got a drink as well. Stay hydrated and all that. Alright, let's get into the Joe Lynn Turner era of Rainbow. And we're going to do that by talking about Difficult to Cure. Now, before we even get into the Wikipedia page here, you can tell that this is the highest charting Rainbow record in the UK ever, peaking at number 3. And it is certified gold in 3 countries, that being the UK, Finland, and Japan, which is not the most, because Rising was also certified gold in 3 countries, but it is the one that peaked the highest. It also peaked at first in Finland, so it's the highest chart position for Rainbow ever. Number 1 in Finland, and number 3 in the UK. So if you just look at that, and you have to make a judgment about this record, especially knowing what happened the last record, you're going to think, wow, they went even further in the sellout direction, right? And the answer to that is both yes and no. Now, there's one thing that we need to address. Well, there's 2 things that we need to address, and those are lineup changes. Now let's go back to Down to Earth real quick, and we'll look at the lineup for the album and we'll compare. So here, personnel. So Graham Bonnet left. Well, rather I think he was kicked. I'm pretty sure he was kicked from the band after Down to Earth. I'm not going to get into why. This isn't a history lesson. And he was replaced by a guy named Joe Lynn Turner, who would later work with Yngwie and would also later work with Deep Purple in 1990. And some other people. But here's the thing. Joe Lynn Turner was not famous when he joined Rainbow. In fact, and this is a very funny story, when he got the call from Richie's manager, being told that Richie wanted him to audition for the role as Rainbow's lead singer, Joe Lynn Turner didn't believe it was Richie's manager. He thought it was, one of his friends playing a prank on him. Because he really wasn't famous. He was living in a small studio apartment in New York, probably eating the same pizza for 3 days or more, barely even had clothes and all that. He was the typical struggling musician. So when he got the call to audition, he didn't believe it. And he made Richie's manager put Ritchie Blackmore on the phone and talk to him directly in his thick British accent, with his thick British manners, for him to even believe that it wasn't a prank or a scam. And then when he went to the audition, Richie liked him, and he didn't even go back They said, no, you're going to stay with us. We'll buy you new clothes. We'll buy you whatever you need. You're staying. So he didn't even go back to his apartment anymore after that. So what's so special about Joe Lynn Turner? Is he as good a singer as Dio and Graham Bonnet? No, honestly not. He doesn't have the vocal range of Dio or well, maybe he has the vocal range of Dio, but he doesn't have the vocal range of Graham Bonnet. He doesn't have the power in his voice that Graham Bonnet and Dio did. So what does this guy have that's better than Dio and better than Graham Bonnet? Now, let me tell you in the clearest English I'm able to speak. Joe Lynn Turner has W Riz. Okay? That's about as bluntly as I can put it. This guy has a charisma to his voice, to his vocal delivery, and to his performance on stage that is extremely underrated, superbly underrated. He is a great vocalist, technically, in his own right, but what really sells his performances, both on album and on stage, is his charisma. You know, not how pretty his face is, but how he communicates the words that he's speaking. The emotion that he puts behind the words, and the friendliness that he puts behind the words when he's delivering a positive message. And, you know, to some extent, the sadness and anger that he also puts behind the words when he's delivering those kinds of messages in the song. So he's the most charismatic frontman Rainbow ever had, which contrasts directly with Ritchie Blackmore's, you know, thick skull, thick skin persona. You know, the man in black, sits in the corner playing guitar, angry face, you know, British bulldog, all that. So it contrasts heavily with Richie, but it complements him in a way that, honestly, the previous two singers didn't. They also complimented Richie, but they didn't fully, you know, outweigh Richie's Riz, or Richie's bad charisma. At least not as well as Joe Lynn Turner managed to. And he also had a very good, he also went on to have a good relationship with Richie for a long time, which is why he would eventually end up on a Deep Purple record 9 years later. So let's talk about Difficult to Cure. Because Difficult to Cure is a better AOR hard rock album than Down to Earth was. And it's also nearly as brilliant an album from an instrumental standpoint as Long Live Rock and Roll was. So let's talk about the singles, you know, the radio rock slammers. Now, the highlight here is obviously I Surrender, which was also written by Russ Ballard, the same guy who wrote Since You've Been Gone from the previous record. This song is great. This song has everything that a great radio rock song needs to have. Catchy lyrics, catchy chorus, good riff, good melody, you know, good length, cool solo, all that. Great, great, great radio rock song. Now let's talk about some of the others. What else does this album have? Well, let's talk about the other standard hard rock songs that are featured in every, you know, Rainbow album. There's No Release, which is a pretty standard hard rock song with a little bit of an AOR spice that Joe Lynn Turner adds. And Midnight Tunnel Vision is also pretty standard a rock song. Now let's talk about some of the other songs. Spotlight Kid is, I think, the highlight of this album for me, or at least one of the highlights. It's a standard hard rock song, but it's fast paced in a similar way to Lost in Hollywood from the previous album. Um, so it's very energetic. It has good lyrics, good vocal delivery, good guitar riffs. You know, it's fast paced, it's energetic, and it has a great solo that features a beautiful, almost Renaissance type folk melody played on guitar and keyboards. That's something that's, you know, a little glimpse of what Richie would do later in his career. If you're familiar with him, you know that he's been doing a Renaissance folk rock project since the 90s with his wife called Blackmore's Night. And the little melody that's played before and after the solos here on Spotlight Kid is like a little demo of that. It's a very typically, you know, Renaissance type folk melody that you might hear on a lute song or something like that. You know, those songs that you play when you're dancing around the table at the tavern, drinking a beer. And it's a, you know, it's a great addition to what is already an already great rock song. It just adds that, you know, little spice, that little cherry on top, that little flavor that makes this a rainbow song and not just a rock song that's performed by any other rock band, you know? So I think Spotlight Kid is definitely a highlight of this album here. Magic is also a somewhat standard rock song, and it has a pretty cool melody that isn't completely standard, but it has a very cool melody to it. Now, Vielleicht das nächste Mal. My German is extremely rusty, so I probably butchered that pronunciation. Vielleicht das nächste Mal. Also known as maybe next time in English. Is an instrumental song, and this is where I get to talk about Richie being a genius and one of the greatest musicians of all time again. And we're gonna talk about that more times going forward. But this is you know, one of those checkpoints. Because every time Richie does an instrumental song, you can expect a beautiful melody accompanied by a masterfully crafted backing to it. And this is no exception to it, okay? This is a great instrumental song, a beautiful song, and if you like instrumental music, something that you should definitely listen to. Now, if you don't like instrumental music and you're only here for the hard rock slammers, this is probably going to be a little bit of a snoozer on the album for you. But, you know, the fact that Richie never shied away from including these artistic tracks in the middle of his, you know, commercial hard rock albums just goes to show that he's just a different breed of musician. He's not a guy that's just doing it for the money. Sure, he wants to make money. Sure, he wants to get attention. But he has that dog in him that cannot be silenced. He has that gene of an artist that cannot be silenced when it needs to express itself. And this is one of the tracks where that really comes out. And anytime he does an instrumental track, you're going to hear a piece of that. So absolutely do not skip this album unless you want to be slapped. Okay? Now onto the B-side, we have some more standard hard rock songs. Although I will have to say that Can't Happen Here and Freedom Fighter are both more energetic and more fast-paced than just about anything on Down to Earth. They are more similar to Spotlight Kid here and Lost in Hollywood from the end of the last record, which means that we have, you know, about at least 3 songs here that are up-tempo, you know, which makes this a relatively faster-paced album, especially for a commercial rock album, which is honestly what makes this album very fun to listen to. And then we're going to get into this, which might have caught your attention if you've been looking at the screen. Difficult to Cure, the title track. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony instrumental, arranged by Blackmore, Roger Gulliver, and Don Airey. So this is an interpretation of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, arranged for a rock band. So, you know, guitar, drums, bass, and keyboards. No vocals, it's an instrumental. And it's basically an exploration of the main motifs and melodies from Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, with some solos in between. And just like, you know, the previous instrumental track, this one is also very expressive in the way that it just lets the instruments talk and doesn't need any lyrics. But this one is a little bit, is way more lighthearted and way more like fun. It's not exactly a deeply emotional track, although it is utilizing melodies from Beethoven that are very expressive in their own right, of course, because it's Beethoven. But this one is a very fun, you know, just a you know, joyride of a track. Something that you can almost feels like they just, you know, hit play in the studio and just jammed out. Could have been very well improvised in a rehearsal or, you know, band practice. So it's, you know, it's an extremely fun track to close out the album, and something that you're definitely not going to find yourself skipping when it comes on if you add it to a playlist, especially if you're driving or, you know, all that. So all that being said, where does that land Difficult to Cure? This is a tough album to place, because it's an album that almost has enough to be S tier, honestly, and that might be a surprising thing to hear. But as far as, you know, judging it from hard rock or radio rock or even AOR standpoint, I think it's hard to place it anywhere beneath A, and that's where I'm going with for this album. It's a solid album through and through. Every song is enjoyable, but it has enough of the core experimental and fantastical and, you know, whimsical rainbow musical identity in the sounds and the textures used, while also having plenty of just hard rock radio slammers that you're gonna have a blast listening to while you're driving. So it's gonna be at the A tier. It's gonna be our first A tier album. And that takes us to Straight Between the Eyes, which is the second studio album to feature Joe Lynn Turner. And I also have to talk about something that I didn't. I forgot to mention the last album. I mentioned that Joe Lynn Turner replaced Graham Bonnet. What I was going to mention, until I forgot to, was that the drummer, Cozy Powell, whom I have been singing praises this entire stream, was also replaced by Bob Rondinelli. And after, you know, me singing Cozy Powell's praises for like as much as I have so far, this may seem like a big downgrade, but I do have to say that if a replacement had to be made, while Bob Rondinelli isn't as iconic or as influential a drummer as Cozy Powell was, he definitely didn't fumble, okay? I think he did a solid job for his entire stay in Rainbow. And he went on to work with other bands very successfully. You know, he worked with Quiet Riot in the 90s. He worked with Sabbath. Worked with Blue Oyster Cult. And, you know, now he's worked with Michael Schenker recently. So, you know, he's done quite a bit of work. He's done well for himself after being in Rainbow. And for somebody that doesn't have a history, doesn't have a single album recorded before difficult to cure. I do have to say that, you know, he did a fine job and he carried the torch rightfully and honorably that was passed to him. So while he's not nearly as respected or renowned as Cozy Powell was, I have no criticism of him, right? If you listen to the live albums with him, you're not going to be disappointed by the drums at all. In fact, you're probably going to be impressed, because while Cozy Powell sets a very high bar, Bobby really didn't disappoint. So I don't want you to think that Cozy Powell missing from the albums, as much as he was instrumental to the early success of Rainbow and to the development of their sound, somehow I'm not going to say he wasn't missed, but if I didn't tell you that he was missing, you might not even notice it, because Bobby did a very good job at picking the torch and running with it, okay? So yeah, let's get into Straight Between the Eyes. So we already established that Difficult to Cure had better hard rock bangers than Down to Earth, and it also had that unique rainbow flavor that originally set it apart from the other bands with the Dio albums. So it had kind of the best of both worlds, which is why it's an album that I hold at a very high regard. So how does Straight Between the Eyes compare? Well, here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that it's just as good. I'm gonna rank it. I'm gonna do it a little bit different. I'm gonna put it in A tier below Difficult to Cure, so it's already ranked. And now I'm going to explain why. Okay. So you already know where it's going. You already know where it's landing. So now let me tell you, if it's just as good as Difficult to Cure, why does it rank lower? Well, let's talk about the similarities first. It has fast-paced hard rock bangers in Death Alley Driver, Rock Fever a little bit, Dream Chaser a little bit as well. It has more traditional, hard rock, AOR bangers, radio rock bangers in Stone Cold, Tight Squeeze, Power, Rock Fever. It has a more emotional, almost ballady track in Tearing Out My Heart, which is a very, it's very similar to Love Is No Friend of Mine from Down to Earth, which we talked about not long ago. So it's that kind of emotional, romantic ballad. So, it has some similarities to the previous album. Now, what does the previous album have that this one misses? Well, first of all, you might notice it doesn't have any instrumentals. And because of that, while the instrumentals are not a mandatory thing in the Rainbow records, they always do add a uniqueness and it's almost what sets it apart sometimes from other standard hard rock albums. And because this album misses that, I feel like it's why it doesn't deserve to be ranked as highly as Down to Earth. So even though it's still A tier, honestly, I could probably even put it in high B. We'll see how the tier list looks at the end, and it might get demoted to high B. Okay. But it is a great album. All the hard rock bangers are bangers. All the AOR radio rock, hits are hits, and they're enjoyable. And you're not gonna skip any of the tracks if you're bumping this album in the car while you're driving. But you are going to miss some of that emotional, unique flavor that you get from the instrumentals or from some of the other experimental tracks that made it onto Difficult to Cure that are not quite as present here. Now, some of the highlights that I'm going to bring that have that unique rainbow flavor are the solo in Death Alley Driver, which is the opening track. So this album opens up with a slammer, high-paced, fast track. And the solo features a little excerpt from a Bach piece for the harpsichord, if I'm not mistaken, or is it for the organ? I think it's for the harpsichord. Here it's arranged for guitar, and it's played much faster than the original piece. But it's a very fun way to open up the solo, and it adds that unique flavor of proto neoclassical that Blackmore helped pioneer, and that we've seen glimpses of in the previous albums. So this kind of just continues that trend, that slow growing trend. So it's a very fun moment, especially live when he plays it at a blistering speed. If you listen to this song on the live album that they did after this one came out, you're going to be astonished by how much faster it is live and by how much harder the double bass drums kick. And also Eyes of Fire, the final track, is also a little bit of a peculiar track because it also has a little bit of that more exotic type of songwriting and melodies. I could almost relate it to Eyes of the World from Down to Earth, which is also funny because it also has eyes in the name. You can see that, you know, sometimes the songs have related names. They also have related aesthetics or related sounds. So Eyes of Fire also has a very, you know, interesting composition to it. It's not as unique as some of the other material that Rainbow has done, but it's definitely an interesting close to the album. And you can see that it has Bobby Rondinelli's contribution here as a writer, which is interesting. Since we were just talking about Cozy and how Bobby did a good job at replacing him. So for now, I'm gonna leave Straight Between the Eyes here. But it might drop down to a high B later on. Definitely above the debut, but we're gonna see about that. I'm gonna leave it here for now. We'll revisit it by the end of the tier list. Also, just before we move on to Bent Out of Shape, I must add that Stone Cold, which is the single, has a beautiful solo. It's a relatively short solo, but it's a very beautiful, very classy guitar solo that displays Ritchie's immaculate phrasing with the guitar and the way he builds melodies inside of solos. So this is a beautiful solo. All right, another sip of water. Okay, let's talk about Bent Out of Shape. Now, this is the last album that Rainbow put out before they disbanded. If you look here, you'll see that this was released in 1983. And then Rainbow would not release again until 1995, 12 years later. And you'll also notice that this album didn't do that well. It doesn't have any certification. It's the only Rainbow album with no certification. Didn't chart as highly as the others. And that's kind of funny to me, because this album has two massive hits. We're gonna go down here to the track listing, and we're going to see here Street of Dreams and Can't Let You Go. And these two songs are massive hits. They're both very AOR radio rock type songs, and they are both massive hits. Can't Let You Go has a beautiful organ intro by David Rosenthal, who was doing the keyboards at this time, replacing Don Airey. And Street of Dreams also has a very interesting composition with a cool solo and all that. Very beautiful melodies, very beautiful vocal melody. So these two songs are massive radio hits. Well, you know, maybe not in comparison to other bands as a whole. You know, it's no like I don't know, Rock You Like a Hurricane or anything like that. Uh, or you know, Jump by Van Halen or anything like that. But they are very good, very big hits. You know, very typical radio hits. And they both performed very well as singles. So that's why it's kind of surprising to me that this album doesn't chart as high as some of the other ones and doesn't have any certifications, because these two songs performed very well. I guess it's just the rest of the album that didn't uh you know, sell as much. So, you know, the sales don't speak for themselves when it comes to this album. So let's look at what else is in here. Stranded, Full for the Night, Desperate Heart, and Make Your Move are your standard hard rock bangers. So you have 4 of them here. You have Make Your Move, Desperate Heart, Full for the Night, and Stranded. All great songs, all, you know, same thing I've been saying about all the other hard rock bangers in the previous albums. Songs that, you know, are not going to touch your soul, but that are definitely going to be fun while you're driving around listening to in your car, and that you're not going to skip. What else is in here? Fire Dance is a great song, and you can see that it has contributions from just about everybody in the band. It's a very fast-paced song with a very interesting melodies and very interesting riffs to it. Has a great guitar solo, great keyboard solo, great accompanying melodies. It's a banger, you know, fast-paced hard rock song in the same fashion that, you know, the ones from the previous albums were. And here, we also have Drinking with the Devil, which is also almost like a glam song. You know, it's a song that you could probably hear like Motley Crue doing a cover of. You could hear that. They never did, but you know, I'm just saying that you could probably hear that. It has that very typically 80s style that was starting to develop at the time with the glam rock and the glam metal. So it's an interesting song. Interesting hearing it from Rainbow, at least. It's a good addition to the album, but it's probably one of the least remarkable songs as a whole, like by itself. But since it's something different from what Rainbow usually does, it's kind of interesting in a way. And then we get back to the instrumentals, which is what I said was missing from the previous albums. From the previous album, I mean. I said that it suffered a little bit from not having instrumentals. And this one has 2. One on the A side, one on the B side. Now the one on the A side is a little bit like the Maybe Next Time from Difficult to Cure. So it's a very, you know, emotional guitar melody driven instrumental song, which is great. As usual, beautiful melodies, beautiful accompanying arrangement. Another display of Blackmore's genius as a musician and as a guitar player. And then there's Snowman, which you can see is a very peculiar song. It has a Wikipedia page for it, but if you click on the Wikipedia page, you'll see that it has a different name. You see that it's a song written by Howard Blake for the 1982 animated film The Snowman, based on a children's book of the same name. And if you know, this might confuse you a lot, you know. And it does confuse me as well. You know, it's not something that you're expecting to find in a hard rock album. You know, especially if you look at the genres here and you see Christmas music, orchestral pop, choral music. You know, it's just very odd. So what is this doing here, and what the heck is it, you know? Well, this is a rearrangement of the Walking in Air song. Blackmore rearranged it for keys, synthesizer, and guitar. And it just has a very, very, very beautiful atmosphere to it. Like, honestly, you have to credit the original material for it, not just Blackmore, but he rearranged it for guitar and keys and synthesizer. So, you know, it's like, it's something that is extremely peculiar to find in this album, and it's something that's definitely going to catch you off guard when it comes on. Like, it's one of those songs that's going to come on and you're going to start hearing it and you're going to think, wait, I was listening to Rainbow. What is this? You know? And then you're going to check and you're going to see, oh, it's still Rainbow. Wow. And then you're going to keep listening to it to figure out where it goes. But if you do give it a chance, in all honesty, it has a very, very beautiful atmosphere to it. So it's definitely something that I'm very glad was included in this album. It's just extremely unique in its own way, and very, very interesting because of that. So, where does that put Bent Out of Shape? Well, it's definitely A tier. And because of that, honestly, I'm going to bump Straight Between the Eyes down to B. And honestly, I'm going to chuck that to the instrumentals. So, Difficult to Cure and Bent Out of Shape are the best that AOR Rainbow has to offer, and probably some of the best that AOR in general has to offer, you know? If you like radio rock and AOR, these two albums are probably some of the best that you can find in that genre. You know, it's like, it's radio friendly and it's, you know, easy to digest while still being musically interesting, you know, having a very broad palette of sounds and textures, great playing, you know, great phrasing and all that. So it's probably the best, like as good as AOR gets, if I'm being honest here. So I'm going to put them both in A tier. And that takes us to the end, to Stranger in Us All, the last studio album that Rainbow ever did. Now here we have to get back to the story a little bit, to the history, I guess. Because like I said, this was released 12 years after Bent Out of Shape. Now, after Bent Out of Shape was released, and I guess maybe because it didn't perform so well commercially, Rainbow ended up splitting. And then they did a final album, which was called Final Vinyl, which I'm not going to talk about because it's mostly a compilation album. You can see it has Spotlight Kid, I Surrender, Miss Mistreated, which are from the from albums. Then it has Jealous Lover, which was B-side of a single, Can't Happen Here, which is in the album, Tearing Out My Heart, which is in the album, Since You Be Gone, which is in the album, Bad Girl, which is B-side of a single, Difficult to Cure, which was in the album, Stone Cold was in the album, Power was in the album, Man on the Silver Mountain was in the album, Long Live Rock and Roll was in the album, and then we have Weisheim, which was the B-side to the All Night Long single. And I didn't talk about this when I was talking about Down to Earth, but Weisheim is another instrumental, and it might be one of Blackmore's best, or at least one of my favorites. So it's, you know, goes in the same category as maybe Next Time, Snowman, and Anybody There. And, you know, some of you that are more acquainted with me, that name, the name of that instrumental, probably rings a lot of bells to you. So, you know, I'm not going to talk about it because it wasn't in an album, in a studio album. But, you know, I'm just going to leave that little breadcrumb there. If you want to follow the trail, go ahead. So they disbanded after Bent Out of Shape, spent 12 years with no Rainbow. Um, Blackmore went back to Deep Purple, did a few albums with them. Then he left again. Graham Bonnet went to Impellitteri. Jolin Turner went to play with Yngwie for a while. They did a record together. Then he played with Deep Purple in the 90s. And all that. And that brings us to 1995, when he brought in a singer by the name of Doogie White, a Scottish guy, and they recorded Stranger in Us All. Now, who is Doogie White? Well, he is also not a very remarkable singer before his career in Rainbow. He literally just sent a demo tape. Richie liked him and picked him for the band. There's not that much to it. But he would eventually, participate in some other bigger acts. He played with Yngwie for 5 years. He played with Michael Schenker as well. And he's been in Alcatraz since 2020. So, he's done some more things since. But he hadn't done anything really remarkable before Rainbow. But he's probably the least remarkable out of all the Rainbow singers. The one with the least impressive technically, and also the one with the least distinguishable personality. And that may seem like a bad sign, but the bar of entry for singers in Rainbow is just so high that this is extremely far from being a disappointment. Doogie is still extremely talented, great live, very charismatic. So, while he's not quite as good as any of the others that came before him, he didn't exactly leave a lot to be desired, He did a very fine job in the one album he was a part of. So let's talk about Stranger in Us All. Now, Stranger in Us All is first of all, it's a long album. You can see that it has 10 songs, which is more than the average for Rainbow albums. And there's a few things that we need to talk about this album, because this album is different from from most of the other Rainbow albums. In a way, it's very similar, but in a way, it's very different. So let's talk about what the common thread has been for every single Rainbow album ever. The staple classic hard rock bangers. Does this album have hard rock bangers? And yes, it does. There's Cold Hearted Woman, which is a hard rock banger. There's Stand and Fight. There's Too Late for Tears. These three are your standard hard rock bangers that can be expected of any Rainbow album. So if that's what you're in for, you won't be disappointed. They're there. But you can see that they're, not even a third of the album. So it's definitely, there seems like there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. Now, here's where I want to bring the attention to the writing credits for this album. And you will see here a person by the name of Candace Knight. Now, Candace Knight is Ritchie Blackmore's wife. She married him after Rainbow disbanded for the first time. And yeah, they lived together from 1991. So, 4 years before this Rainbow album. And if you're familiar with Blackmore's Night, the band that Blackmore is currently involved with, you know that it's 50% Blackmore and 50% Knight. Now, the Knight here isn't just the word Knight, it's the last name of Candace Knight, who is Richie's wife and a phenomenal singer in her own right, okay? And you can see that she has writing credits for several songs here in this album. Now, what is Blackmore's Night? Is it just Richie, doing his wife a favor? Just being, a little good husband and indulging his wife's desire to express her artistic inclinations? No, because Candace is an outstanding singer in her own right, and Blackmore's Night is completely different from anything else that Blackmore ever did, and it just shows that Blackmore didn't want to play conventional hard rock anymore, which is why he decided to form this band with his wife and do folk rock and medieval rock. Something that he had never done before, at least not in this fashion. Just going full-blown the other way. Originally being somebody who rejected these kind of folk and neoclassical inclinations at the beginning of Deep Purple, going like all the other way into becoming just a fully fledged, neo-medieval folk rock musician. Now, this album was just 2 years before Blackmore's Night was founded, and you can see that Richie's wife, Candace Knight, has writing credits in several songs here. Wolf to the Moon, Ariel, Black Masquerade, Hall of the Mountain King. And honestly, these 4 songs that I just mentioned, Hall of the Mountain King, Black Masquerade, Ariel, and Wolf to the Moon, are probably the 4 best songs in this entire album. Especially Hall of the Mountain King and Ariel, but the others too. And I would also give a shout out to Hunting Humans here, even though it's not credited tonight. I would also say it as a highlight of the album. So this album has a lot more folk rock influences than any other Rainbow album before it. It still has some of the hard rock bangers, but it just does everything that Rainbow ever did. Like, there's a little bit from every Rainbow era in this album. And while it may not peak as high as some of the other albums did, there isn't a Stargazer in this album. There isn't even, I Surrender in terms of like a hard rock hit. It does everything that it shoots out to do extremely well. Cold Hearted Woman, Stand and Fight, Too Late for Tears, solid hard rock hits, as we've discussed. Now, Wolf to the Moon and Black Masquerade are 2 great, faster-paced tracks with very, very interesting folk rock, and neo-medieval rock, melodic influences. A little bit of the thing that I mentioned a while ago with Spotlight Kid, having some of those melodies that you would expect to hear on a lute but played on guitar. These 2 songs have a lot of that. Ariel is a track with a beautiful, beautiful atmosphere and also a gorgeous guitar solo. Just a guitar solo that leaves you wanting more, especially at the end as it fades out and the solo's going on. You're just like, damn, I want more of this. It's very touching, great playing, great phrasing, very emotional, very inspired. Hunting Humans is a very dark track in a way that's not very expected of Rainbow. So it shows some different themes. Some themes that are, again, more common in folk music. Folklore, mythology, that kinds of things. It's brought back a little bit here. And Hunting Humans is one of the tracks that displays that in a little bit more of a darker way. And also Hall of the Mountain King, which is inspired by the piece by Edvard Grieg, which I'm not sure how to pronounce exactly. I don't speak Norwegian. I'm just gonna say Edvard, almost as if it were German. This song is not an interpretation of the piece in the same way that Difficult to Cure was an interpretation of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. This one is an actual song with lyrics written by Candace Knight, arranged into a song by Blackmore. So it's a conventional song with a main riff, a verse, a chorus, and it utilizes the melody as a part of the main riff out of which the song is constructed. And I would really like to highlight the end of this song, where they begin to play the riff of the Hall of the Mountain King, and the outro of the song is basically them playing the riff over and over again, just like the original piece. It starts to speed up and get more and more intense, and then it modulates a few times until it eventually crashes down and explodes, and that's where the song comes to an end. And again, I would like to highlight the live performance of this track, where something that is already fast and already, somewhat challenging to play on guitar, when played live at an even faster pace and with more energy, becomes, super, super, like, exciting and even more impressive. And at the end here, you'll also see that it has another cover of Still I'm Sad. And no, you are not seeing doubles. This is the same Still I'm Sad cover that was done in the original Rainbow album, the debut album. So they're doing this cover again, but it's not the same cover. In a way, them doing it again is obviously a nod to the original cover, but you'll see that this one is 3 minutes and 51 seconds long, whereas this one is 5 minutes and 22 seconds long. This version of Still I'm Sad is a completely new arrangement of the song that was originally instrumental, now with added vocals, and with some of the original song melodies being utilized by the vocalist as a singing melody. So while it's a cover of the same song, is an entirely new take on it with added vocals that weren't existent in the original song. It's a very, very cool closer to the album, especially since it's a nod to the original debut album. And, it's a great song in its own right. So it's a very, very fun listen, and a very, very good way to close out the album, especially since it would end up being the final Rainbow album. So yeah, that brings us to the end of Stranger in Us All. Now, where does that put it in the tier list? This is a Rainbow album that most people, even Rainbow fans, have probably never even listened to. And honestly, dude, you are missing out, okay? Because I'm gonna tell you, this might surprise you. I'm gonna put this album in A tier. And not only that, I have I could make a very, very solid case for it being at the top of A tier. Now, the only reason I'm not going to put it at the top of A tier is because, one, Jolene Turner is a better vocalist and is more charismatic than Doogie White. Two, it doesn't have the same emotional instrumentals that these two albums have. Three, the hard rock slammers, the radio rock hits, while they are still good, they are not as good as the ones in these two albums. And while I do love the highs of this album with all the neo-medieval and folk rock influences, and the influences that Candace brought into the band, it's not enough to outweigh the other things that I just mentioned. So it's gonna sit at the bottom of A tier. But I could maybe make an argument for peaking higher than both of these albums. At least being, having a more interesting aesthetic than both of these albums conceptually. But these two albums are more consistent, and they have some things that this one lacks. Maybe if this album had a very sick emotional instrumental, it would probably bump it to the top of the A tier. But it's missing a couple things that these two albums had that you know, are just what make Rainbow Rainbow. So while this is still very much a Rainbow album, and while it's still very much a great album, it's gonna have to be at the bottom of A. And that brings us to the end of the tier list. And you might notice that there are 0 albums in D. Now, I did mention at the start that D was the only tier where I would consider an album to be disappointing. That's D for disappointing. So it's an album that's better off not being released, or that at least should have been reworked heavily before being released. Rainbow doesn't have anything like that. The closest to it is Down to Earth, and that can be chucked off to an album that marked a shift in the band's philosophy, in the band's aesthetic, in the band's creative direction. And it was the only album with the singer, with Graham Bonnet, so he didn't have time to settle in. You can see that none of the other singers peaked on their debut. Graham didn't either. So maybe if he got another album, maybe if he was on Difficult to Cure would have still been on top of A with Graham, probably. So, it's just an album that was a little bit below average. Not because it sucks, far from it, but because it didn't do quite as much, quite as well as any of the others. So it's still a solid album, still something that I recommend listening to it, but you can leave it for last. You can listen to everything else first, and you can leave this one for last if you really like the band. It's the one that you're gonna miss out on the least by skipping. But yeah, that's my opinion. So let's see if there's anything in chat. Children's stories have long contributed to rock. I agree. That is very true. Something I've noticed about Rainbow is that they really like Japan, or maybe really liked in Japan. I wonder why that is. Okay, that's true. And that is a very, very, very deep can of worms that I don't have time to open today. In the future, I can do a stream talking just about Japan and metal in Japan, if you guys would like that. I feel like it would be a fun topic to cover. Japan has a very peculiar market for metal and rock, even to this day. But it's a complicated topic. I just don't have the time or the voice. My throat is quite sore already to talk about it today. Okay, so it's gonna have to be left out for a future stream. But I can do a stream just talking about Japan in the future if you guys would like. So yeah, before I end the stream, this is the final tier list. I want to leave the door open for some questions or comments that you guys might have before I end the stream. So, if you guys want to argue, if you guys want to comment, if you guys have any questions, now is the best time for it. So I'm just gonna, rest my throat a little bit, finish my water here, and let you guys go off and see if we have anything interesting left to discuss before we close out the stream. If you guys would like to leave your thoughts about the tier list, as well as the format of the video, or any bands or topics that you would like to see covered in the future, this is also a good time to do it. Although you can also do it on the Discord if you'd like. So yeah, the floor is all yours. I would like that since I like some Japanese rock bands. Okay, I'll definitely add it to my bucket list then of streams to do. We will be doing a music stream about metal in Japan. Noted. It was a very interesting stream, but I think we should stick to bands with few albums. I agree. I definitely yapped a lot, and if I talked about some other bands with more albums, I would have to be a lot briefer. I wouldn't be able to yap as much about each individual album. Otherwise, we would be here for like 4 or 5 hours talking about them. But I think Rainbow is a little bit of an exception because I'm very passionate about this band and I know a lot about them. So I'm able to talk a lot more without doing any preparation. I mean, I did zero research for this stream. That's why I decided to start with Rainbow, because it's a band that I can just yap about for 2.5 hours without any preparation whatsoever. So yeah, that's why I chose it for the first one. But if we do bands with more albums in the future, which we probably will, we're going to go over each album a bit more, in less detail, a bit faster. Any more closing thoughts? All right. So that's what going to so that's going to be for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I ended up going for almost 2.5 hours anyways, which was about as long as I would probably play the game for. But it was nice to just sit and yap. I really wasn't in the mood to play a game tonight, so I'm glad I was able to do something different. And I'm glad you guys seem to have enjoyed it. So thank you all for watching. You would love to hear me sing Catch the Rainbow one day. I'm not sure I'm willing to embarrass myself that much for free. I'm a terrible singer, dog. My singing voice is awful. But maybe. Okay? Maybe. Maybe one day. So alright. I leave you guys with this listening list. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. I hope you guys learned something. I hope you guys listened to the songs or the albums that I recommended. I assure you, you will not be disappointed. So, yeah, have a blessed evening, a blessed night, and good night, everybody. I'll see you guys tomorrow with Pokemon Fire Red. Bye-bye. God bless.